Folks, Canadian Prepper here, back in with your daily dose of doom and gloom. This is going to be a quick one today because I got better things to do, like preparing for the collapse of civilization as we know it. And I can unabashedly say that at this point because sooner than later, we are going to see the normalization of nuclear war and survival skills being practiced on a massive scale, unfortunately. And that is because, look around, folks, it's all falling apart. Now, what do we got going on today? In the last 48 hours, we came within spitting distance of nuclear Armageddon because one leg of the Russian nuclear triad, that is their strategic bombers, were targeted by a Ukrainian drone, and the Russians view the Ukrainians and NATO simultaneously. How could you not when the Ukrainian military is propped up with $100 billion in NATO funding, NATO mercenaries, and NATO intelligence? Anyways, we have that situation. We have a power grid attack in the United States, which is still unexplained. There has been some speculation about the cause of that, although no evidence has been provided. It's still quite possibly something state-sponsored or terrorist-related that's not of a domestic terrorism sort. We have the Ukrainians, according to an NGO, are going to be in the dark, and it's going to be a humanitarian disaster by Christmas time. We have 700 tanks supposedly being moved to Poland and Romania. Take that one with a grain of salt. This is the information I am getting. Oftentimes, the information from this source turns out to be correct just a few days later. We have the U.S. military tripling their ammunition production. Nothing to see there. We have more attacks today on Russian military bases, at Kursk and Bryansk. We have UK Trident submarines, those nuclear ones, the ones with nuclear missiles. They have set new records for their longest ever patrols. How great is that? We have another interesting story is that some of the weapons that they're using in the high-intensity conflict going on in Eastern Europe right now, like the HIMARS and the kamikaze Iranian drones, are not functioning that well in winter. As well, NATO is preparing for an all-out cyber war with Russia. There was recently an exercise in Estonia, and China is accusing the United States of stoking the flames of nuclear Armageddon. So let's just talk about this, guys, because like I said, I got better things to do than beat this dead horse to death. Oh, if you guys never seen the movie Threads, don't watch it because you'll be very depressed, and there's no happy ending. Victoria Nuland apparently visited. She's I think her designation is Under Secretary of State. She's a diplomat anyways, okay? And she went and spent the night at Zeke's house, Zelensky's house, and then a day later, they're attacking Russian nuclear bombers, okay? Interesting. Now, what makes it more interesting is that she is affiliated with this Institute for the Study of War. It's a think tank, okay? Which is heavily biased towards the Ukrainian narrative. Fine. However, the ISW came out with the baseless speculation that this might have been a Russian false flag. Interesting how the day after she was there in Ukraine, all of a sudden the ISW, a think tank that she plays an integral role in, somehow is saying that this was a Russian false flag. That seems suspicious. Now, the fact that there was more attacks today signals to me that on some level this has been greenlit by someone within Washington, okay? Because doing it one day, getting their hands slapped, okay, but doing it again, that's concerning. And the biggest point of concern for me in all of this was the Russian media blackout about the issue for the first half a day, at least the first 12 hours. Then they simultaneously came out on all the Russian news networks at the same time, and then they had their script that they were supposed to read. Oh yeah, we shot down these drones and the debris rained down and maybe slightly impacted our aircraft, but didn't do any major damage, okay? So you know that in that first 12 hours, you can bet that the nuclear tension was escalated. We're talking about a very, very high state of nuclear alert with the armed forces, not just the Russians, of course, but ours, because we would be on high alert at that point. How could we not be? Now, with respect to the DEFCON levels, DEFCON, if you didn't know, DEFCON 1 is cock pistol. That means nuclear war is imminent or has begun. That's the worst. If we're at DEFCON 1, you can pretty much guarantee that shit's going to hit the fan. I mean, it would be very hard to come back from the brink of DEFCON 1. DEFCON 5, on the other hand, is a normal state of readiness. Nothing major going on. We are far from DEFCON 5 right now. Some people might say we're at DEFCON 3. Roundhouse, U.S. Air Force ready to mobilize, launch aircraft in less than 15 minutes, increase in total military readiness. I would probably say, at least in Europe, in the European Command, because we don't really see everything. I mean, there's Europe and then there's over here. But in Europe, I would say that they were probably close to fast-paced. Next step is nuclear war. All of U.S. forces or NATO forces in that region ready to deploy in 6 hours or less. Leaves canceled, reserves called up. Or if nuclear first strike is planned, key reserves only. Now, the thing is, this is classified information. If you go online and you Google what is the current DEFCON level, you're going to be greeted with this site called defconlevel.com. That's not an official site. That's a site that tries to use intelligence that it gathers to determine where we're at. Europe has been at DEFCON 2 according to that website all year. We have been at DEFCON 3 or 4, I believe. I'm guessing probably 3. So we really don't know what the DEFCON level is. However, there were a few criteria yesterday which almost certainly put us at DEFCON 2, and probably still, because there's still these attacks coming in. The first thing is the attack on the strategic bombers themselves could have been misinterpreted as a first strike or a precursor to a first strike by the Russians. This immediately would put their military on high alert, and their nuclear forces, their strategic forces, on high alert. And you know that those submarines are locked and loaded right now. You can bet. And so I lost my train of thought. So DEFCON levels. The Russians have this huge list of criteria. This is a 30-page long document. I'm going to do a video specifically on this, because they don't know, because they're never going to announce. The United States is never going to announce DEFCON 2. So the Russians are looking for signs that we're at a higher DEFCON level, that we're planning a first strike. And recall that the United States recently altered its formal nuclear doctrine to allow for a first strike. So I'm just skipping to any page here, so some of these might be a little bit more obscure, but declines of permissions for foreign diplomats and journalists to travel to areas where military objects are located. That's what the Russians are looking for. So they're looking for, has the U.S. military declined permissions for foreign diplomats and journalists to travel to areas where military objects are located? Let's just pick another one. Increase of border and customs control at state borders, airports, or seaports. Here's another one. Increase in security for government officials and high-ranking people. These are things you'd see in the run-up to a nuclear conflict. Preparation for warships for going out to sea. Well, I'm pretty sure most of the aircraft carriers right now are already out to sea. So you see a lot of these criteria are already fulfilled. And if enough of these are fulfilled, then that, of course, elevates the Russian DEFCON level. We're going to do an in-depth video on that, because I do believe it is very important. Now, I believe I briefly talked about the Victoria Nuland visit to Zelensky and why that's kind of a little suspicious. But what that signals is that on some level, it's likely that Washington has green-lit this escalatory activity, and that is scary, dangerous. It signals also that maybe they're getting a little bit desperate, because this is purely symbolic. I mean, sneaking a drone past Russian air defense in this limited capacity is not going to, it's not going to do anything. I mean, you could attack 10 of those planes and it's not going to change the course of the conflict. The only thing it will do is perhaps embarrass the Russians a bit. The fact is, they do have a very large border with Ukraine and all of the Baltic states, which it's hard to defend. I mean, it's hard to, especially against low-flying, maneuverable drones like that. It is difficult to defend. The Russians claim they shot it down, but maybe they're just trying to save face. Regardless, there isn't much to the speculation that the Russians might have done this to themselves as a false flag in order to garner more support for the conflict. Because if it was a false flag, you think they would try to hit civilian targets, because that would really piss people off. Because in order to get support for a war, you need to make people feel like they're victims. Okay, you need to make people fear that if they don't do something, life is going to be harder for them. So that's why you would do that. But doing it to a military installation wouldn't do much except signal that, hey, maybe your air defense isn't that good. Now, what I will say, people are always knocking Russian military equipment, but the reason why the Russian Air Force hasn't been as successful as it probably should be in Ukraine is because Ukraine has been using all of the Soviet-era air defense. Yeah, recently they started using more of NATO air defense systems, but it's a testament to Soviet-era missile defense, which is what the Russians now have, several iterations that are more advanced, several levels more advanced than what the Ukrainians were using. So I don't think this necessarily speaks badly about Russian air defense necessarily. I think, like I said yesterday, I think it just caught them off guard, because I think they must have thought this is suicidal to do something like this, to target the leg of the strategic triad, the nuclear triad, NATO attacking Russia's nuclear triad. Like, they must be thinking to themselves, these people have lost their minds, or they're just going for broke. Maybe there's an asteroid coming, we just don't know, and they're just like, who cares, let's just start a nuclear war. I don't know. According to James Stavridis, a retired NATO admiral, he's talking about how we've reached a new phase, and this is a new and extremely dangerous turn of events in the war in Ukraine, referring to the recent Ukrainian drone attacks, which have basically now normalized attacks on Russian territory. That's when this becomes existential for the Russians, which is one more box that gets ticked for licensing them to use their nuclear weapons in line with their own nuclear doctrine. They're concerned that if the Ukrainians can carry strikes that deep, that they can also target Moscow, because these drones, I believe they're Tu-141 refurbished Soviet-era drones, can travel up to 1,000 kilometers. According to him, the West is going to try to deter Ukrainians from carrying out larger scale attacks inside Russia. But this is the way that the war is going. And as I've always said, war is war. If you're attacking another country, you got to expect that they're going to attack you back, right? According to sources cited by the New York Times, at least one of the attacks against Russian airports was carried out with the help of Ukrainian commandos who operate deep within Russian territory, directing the drones to the targets. Now, this is one hell of a story that I'm about to share with you. I probably should have put this one up front and center, because if this is true, then holy shit. Apparently, Poland and Romania are going to be getting a colossal transfer of, get this, 700 tanks, M1A2 Abrams and M2 Bradley. Hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles were moved from the U.S. to Romania and Poland, with Russian authorities on high alert. The scene being set up for a Polish-Ukraine and Romanian-Ukraine border is reminiscent of preparations for a major war. This is from a Greek website, which is notoriously neutral and moderate when it comes to their observations of this conflict, but they're also incredibly accurate, okay, with respect to their predictions. They're usually always a few days ahead of the news cycle. 700 tanks and armored vehicles such as M2 Bradley, M113, and M1A2 Abrams were unloaded at the port of Gdynia in Poland. At the same time, an unspecified number of American units were also deployed in Romania, along with the several French Leclerc tanks. So guys, what the hell are they preparing for? This website, as well as many others, are suspecting that there's going to be some sort of Polish incursion into Western Ukraine. I don't think that the Ukrainian nationalists are going to take too kindly to that. In fact, there has been some issues between Polish mercenaries and Ukrainian troops already. The Ukrainian troops are complaining that the Polish mercenaries have better equipment, they eat better, they just get treated better. So anyways, there's this potential for a new front in the conflict. Recall World War II, there was 3 separate sets of belligerents. I mean, there was the Russians, then there was the Germans, then there was the alliance, right? The British, the French, and the United States and everybody else. So we may well see something like this transpire because all of those Ukrainians are in Poland anyways. And what could potentially happen is you could have some Ukrainian forces fight on that side. And here I'm just totally speculating. But it wouldn't be hard to imagine that if the Russians were able to push in, that Poland would play a more pivotal role in administrating that region. This 700 tanks is thought to be part of a larger batch of 2,400 armored vehicles. What do you need that many tanks for, folks? And why is the U.S. military committing to a dramatic increase in ammunition production? Get this, they have sent 924,000 155 millimeter artillery rounds to Ukraine since February 24th. Now, there was one point where the Russians were firing off supposedly between 50,000 and 70,000 artillery rounds a day. Now that has come down to around 30,000, they say. But the United States has sent almost 1 million. They have the capability to manufacture only 14,000. So like literally less than half a day's worth of what the Russians are using. That's what the United States can churn out on a day. Now they're going to triple that so that maybe they can compete with the Russians 1 day a month in this regard. I will say, as everything is collapsing around us, if you want a place to invest your money and you already got your food, water, shelter, medicine, means of self-defense, and maybe you put a little bit into precious metals, what does Baron von Rothschild say when there's blood in the streets? Buy stock in the arms industry. Sad but true. That's probably the only thing that is going to be ticking upwards on the ticker in the next few years. According to the NGO Mercy Corps, they said that Ukrainian cities will become unlivable in 4 months. It's getting cold right now. Could you imagine living in the city? What's going to happen, we're going to make a video on this. We're going to be releasing it in a couple days. There's going to be a lot of fires. And we already talked about this because people are just going to be burning whatever they can to stay warm. You know, I used to work at a bad end of town and in a hospital. And, you know, we would come out in the middle of the night to have a smoke back when I was an idiot and I smoked cigarettes. Not saying you're an idiot. I'm just saying, you know, you could accomplish a lot more in life if you just quit smoking. Anyways, yeah, and there was these yahoos across the bend, you know, they just pull planks of there. And this is in the dead of summer now. But mind you, this is Saskatoon. So, you know, Saskatoon West Side, if anybody knows, you guys know what's up. Yeah, they would just pull a plank off the fence, break it in half, throw it in the fire. And by 4 a.m, you know, half the fence was gone. And that would repeat every other weekend until there was no fence whatsoever. So I'm making fun, but honestly, have a way to heat your home in case of emergency like this, because this power grid attack is concerning for me. I had somebody send me a message, and they were pretty concerned about the curfew that's being put on people there in North Carolina, where this attack on the power grid that's affecting 40,000 people is. There's a curfew, apparently. Now, is that because there was some looting? I don't know. Is this some kind of practice run? You know, tinfoil. Yeah, I know. But you never know. You just never know, because, you know, you would want to get a sense of how things are going to play out, especially with all this stuff going on right now, guys. There is a distinct reality, distinct possibility that a cyber war, not even a cyber war, but an all-out war, electromagnetic pulse, whatever, our power grid is highly vulnerable this time of year. And when you have these erratic weather patterns happening where the jet stream is broken down, like tonight, it's going to be minus 50 with the wind chill, and on Friday, it's going to be minus 5. Actually, Thursday, it's going to be minus 5. So in 2 days, the temperature is going to shift nearly 35 degrees. It's absolutely insane. So they're saying that Kiev is going to go from measuring their power outages in weeks and days as opposed to hours like it is now. And funny thing here, this NGO, it's funny what their priorities are. They say everything is interconnected. The ability of hospitals and clinics to keep running, to keep, most importantly, vaccines cool, keep medicine stored, food stored, supply chains, all of these depend on dependable power supply. It's funny how they put keeping vaccines cool before food storage, medicines, and supply chains. God, it's a Newsweek article. It is what it is. So just to reiterate, there was Ukrainian attacks again today on Kursk and Bryansk. Apparently there was a Crimean raid that was foiled. Ukrainian army struck targets inside Russian territory for the second day in a row, which signals somebody greenlit that from Washington. We also have the UK Trident submarines, the nuclear sort. Brighton's Trident nuclear-armed submarines have recently been deployed at sea for record-breaking periods of 5 months each, leading one former Navy commander to warn that longer periods could affect operational safety. Wasn't there just a fire on a nuclear submarine the other day? Yeah. Interesting how they're coming out with this now. And apparently that fire, that actually happened a few weeks before it was announced. But it was on the same day that Rishi Sunak was rushed out of that conference. You remember that? JWB style, where he was taken out and somebody whispered in his ear and said, hey, shit's hitting the fan, so you got to go. Strange things are happening, guys. But I can tell you that our governments are probably not nearly as competent as people think when it comes to our strategic nuclear arsenal, which is why you got to get a copy of Nuclear War Survival Skills and watch the videos that we're about to release with that expert on the topic, Stephen Harris. We interviewed him a couple days ago. It's a blue strip video. He says, shut up and just prepare for it because it is survivable. Nuclear war is survivable. Okay? Repeat after me. Nuclear war is survivable. I used to not believe it until I knew the facts. So spare yourself the time. Do not go in the comment section and say, nobody survives a nuclear war. You don't know what you're talking about. Watch some of our videos, just for a week or so. Russia has frozen operations of its Iranian kamikaze drones. Some people are speculating that's because they simply don't work in winter. Now, Iran is a warm climate, a lot warmer than here. 40 degrees Celsius is very, very common there most days of the year. And you're sending them to a war zone where it's, down to minus 25 degrees Celsius in the wintertime, if not worse. So, yeah, there's a good chance that these things aren't going to fly that well. And this is effectively a training ground now for winter gear because the HIMARS are having troubles as well. According to a Russian military official, he told the state-owned media that the onset of cold weather jeopardized the high-tech HIMARS system's efficiency. And I would say that probably most vehicles are going to, have more maintenance issues in the wintertime. It's just harder on vehicles. You got to run them longer and, to keep them warm. Anyways, HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems are inappropriate for use in combat operations during the winter in the East European region. And this is something to do with the lack of camouflage. If it no longer has the cover from foliage, it's impossible to make tracks in the mud and snow. And so I'm presuming that they're not operating around evergreen needle leaf style trees that are green year round. And they're talking about situations where camouflage might not suffice because you would think you would just paint them white or something like that. But maybe there's something I don't know. Obviously, the Russians are using thermal optics, so they're looking for heat signatures. And they have some pretty sophisticated drone technology, which can basically spot that stuff from a mile away, literally. So, yeah. We also have NATO preparing for an all-out cyber war with Russia. 150 NATO cyber-specialized officials gathered in Tallinn, Estonia this week to discuss and organize the NATO response to Russian cyber attacks. According to Colonel Byrd Hansen, chief of the cyber division at NATO's Allied Transformation Command, he says the world has never experienced an all-out cyber war in which cyber attacks are used with the same devastating results as physical strikes, such as disrupting critical services such as electricity and water and preventing their restoration. The war in Ukraine has raised questions about how NATO would respond to such a large cyber attack against a member state that could potentially invoke Article 5. If Russia targets somebody, what is the threshold with a cyber attack? Does it elicit Article 5 being invoked? And if so, how are nations going to act on it? Cyber attack in winter is probably one of the scariest things, because not only, yes, do we have the threat of potential nuclear Armageddon, we have EMP, we have these isolated attacks on the power grid that we just seen a couple days ago in North Carolina. And getting these problems fixed is not going to be easy. If you have a few situations like that where you get several of these transformers taken out, the supply chain bottlenecks, especially right now at the situation in China, Biden doesn't want to kiss the Chinese butt, even though some people think he does. But I'm not sold on the notion that, Biden is nearly as in bed with the Chinese as a lot of people think he are. Just that, the last year doesn't bear that out, all the things that have happened. Anyways, if you can't get transformers to fix the grid, then it's going to take a lot longer to fix these things. And just remember, in order to minimize panic, they're always going to say, don't worry, we'll fix it right away. They're never going to say, it's going to be 2 or 3 weeks. They're never going to say that. They're always going to say, just hold on, we're doing our best. They're always going to minimize it. I think that's all I have for you today. I got more prepping that I have to get to. And if you want to get depressed, go watch the movie Threads. If you want some body armor before Justine makes that illegal as well, go get some body armor. If you need a gas mask, Mirror Safety, we got Mirror Safety, everything. We got SGE, we got 3M, all kinds of gas masks at the ready. Trust me, guys, after the bomb drops, all that stuff flies off the shelves. I mean, during the pandemic, you could not find a gas mask if your life depended on it. They were selling them on eBay for thousands of dollars. The hat that he's wearing, all fur hat, I believe this is a Condor level 5 plate carrier. He's got his LA police gear pants on. What else do we got here? This is the Immolent. This is the brightest flashlight ever made. And the battery is dead right now. Oh, it's locked. Let's see if I can unlock it. Do I remember how to unlock it? I think you got to hit it twice. Well, isn't that embarrassing? I don't know how to unlock the super flashlight. Let's see if I unscrew it. Let's just do this. Anyways, we got a review on it, so just take my word for it. Still not working for some. Oh, there we go. That's 100 lumens. Bam. Anyways, yeah, if you want to, there actually was a weapon in the Vietnam War. It was a flashlight. It actually would flash and stun the enemy, kind of like a stun gun. And it wasn't even a fraction of how bright that thing is. We got our Kelly kettle, one of the most efficient ways to boil water in the bush, bar none. We have an Apollo compound bow. We have just a bunch of stuff. You guys know what we have. You've been watching the channel for a long time. Anyways, guys, you take care. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.